Picture this. It's 480 BC at a narrow coastal pass called Thermopylae. On one side, you have a relentless, seemingly endless force of hundreds of thousands from the Persian Empire. And on the other side, just 300 men from Sparta. We all know the myth. We've seen the blockbuster movies, right? It's framed as the ultimate display of glorious, unyielding heroism. But what if I told you that the legendary bravery of those 300 men wasn't actually born out of a love for freedom, but from a psychological prison so incredibly dark that it makes our modern anxieties look like absolute child's play? Welcome to this explainer, because today we are going to completely shatter a myth. When the Persian king demanded the Spartans lay down their weapons and surrender, King Leonidas replied with just a few chilling words. Come and take them. It's basically the ultimate historical mic drop. It is, without a doubt, one of the most gravity-defying, iconic quotes in human history. But when we actually pull back the curtain on the society that forged this kind of iron will, we uncover a really disturbing truth. This legendary courage wasn't just bravery. It was the inevitable byproduct of deep, systematic, and inescapable trauma. Because this is where the history completely stops being just a list of dates and battles and becomes this really intense mirror, reflecting the extreme edges of human psychology. Think about it. We live in an era completely obsessed with optimization, right? With the hustle grind set, with biohacking, with turning ourselves into these perfect little machines for success. But Sparta took this to a terrifying absolute. What actually happens to the human mind when an entire society optimizes for exactly one metric, completely eradicating every other aspect of human existence just to achieve it? To really grasp the psychological state of a Spartan, you just have to look at their neighbors. When we think of ancient Greece today, we usually think of Athens, the birthplace of philosophy, beautiful art, poetry, science. You've got Socrates, Plato, the whole shebang. But just a few hundred miles away, Sparta looked at all of that culture and completely rejected it. No art, no philosophy, no science. If you were a brilliant, creative thinker in Sparta, you were literally useless. They engineered a completely one-dimensional identity. You were either a weapon of the state or you were nothing. Section 1. Engineered only for death. It's a really sobering thought. I want you to imagine a society where childhood isn't just neglected, it is systematically and intentionally stolen. A place where your value as a human being is calculated the literal second you take your very first breath. Just trace this timeline for a second. On day 1, a newborn is inspected by the elders. If they're deemed physically weak, they are discarded in a pit outside the city to die. At age 7, boys are literally ripped from their mothers and thrown into military barracks. At 20, if they managed to survive, they joined the Syzitia, which were these mandatory military dining clubs where they had to eat every single meal. It wasn't until age 30 that a Spartan man was finally allowed to spend the night in his own home with his wife. It is the most terrifying ancient equivalent of toxic hustle culture. It's a system where you are never, ever allowed to clock out. And the crazy part is, they didn't even try to hide what they were doing to these kids. The training system from age 7 onwards was called the Agoge. Now listen to the literal translation of that ancient Greek word. It translates to the rearing of cattle. They literally viewed their own children as livestock. You weren't an individual with hopes or dreams or unique personality. You were just raw material to be domesticated, broken down, and processed by this grinding societal machine. And to program this absolute unquestioning obedience, they went to horrific lengths. Take the religious festival for the goddess Artemis. They would intentionally starve these teenage boys and then place cheese on the altar. As the starving boys desperately tried to steal the food just to survive, Spartan elders would ruthlessly whip them, sometimes even to death. The ones who endured the agony and got the cheese became the absolute elite. It was basically state-sponsored trauma bonding, designed from the ground up to breed unquestioning endurance. But here is the really painful psychological truth behind that ritual. They weren't being punished for the moral crime of stealing. In fact, they were highly encouraged to steal because the state deliberately underfed them. No, they were brutally punished for getting caught. It was a complete inversion of morality. Traditional ethics were entirely erased and replaced by this singular, cold rule: efficiency and survival above all else. If you get caught, you're a flawed weapon. Section 2. The ticking time bomb. But why? Why on earth would you subject your own citizens to this living nightmare? What kind of external threat possibly justifies turning your entire society into a factory of suffering? Well, the dark, hidden secret of Sparta is that their greatest threat wasn't actually outside their walls at all. It was inside. 10-1.
I really want you to just let that terrifying ratio hang in the air for a moment. 10 to 1.
That is, the ratio of enslaved Greeks, who were known as the Helots, to actual Spartan citizens. Sparta was essentially living on top of a societal volcano. While the Spartan elites spent their entire lives just training for war, the massive Helot population did all the farming, all the labor, all the manufacturing. The Spartans were hopelessly outnumbered by the very people they subjugated. And this forced the entire Spartan society into a chronic, unending state of hypervigilance and absolute paranoia. The paranoia was so deep that the Spartans utilized the constant, looming threat of a slave rebellion as a literal training sandbox for their youth. To graduate into the highest ranks of the Spartan military, a young man had to stalk the countryside at night, find a Helot who looked maybe a bit too strong or a bit too smart, and murder him. To maintain their grip on power, the state actively required its youth to completely eradicate their own empathy. So the absolutely crucial point here is this. Sparta was a society at war with itself. They were constantly and violently suppressing the very foundation that kept them fed and alive. Think about the modern equivalent of extreme burnout. What happens to a person when their entire internal system is at war with itself, desperately trying to maintain this flawless, indestructible facade while fundamentally ignoring everything else? Eventually, the system cracks. Section 3, Mothers of the War Machine. Now, this extreme functionalization of human life wasn't just limited to the men. It extended entirely to the women as well, but in a way that was completely unique to the ancient world. In places like Athens, women were cloistered, hidden away indoors, and completely uneducated. But look at the Spartan contrast. Women in Sparta were athletes. They were highly educated. They owned property and wielded massive political influence. But before we rush to praise this as some kind of ancient progressivism, we have to look at the why. This freedom was granted for one singular, incredibly clinical reason. They were viewed as premium incubators for the state. The state simply believed that strong, well-fed, athletic women would produce superior warriors. The societal pressure was absolute. In Sparta, there were only 2 ways you could earn a tombstone with your name on it. You either died in combat as a man, or you died in childbirth as a woman. Just let that sink in for a second. The act of giving birth was literally viewed as a military operation. Every single citizen, male or female, was ultimately viewed as a totally disposable asset for the machine. Section 4, Winning Battles, Losing the War. This level of extreme, uncompromising rigidity absolutely created the most fearsome warriors the world had ever seen. There's no denying that. But it also laid the exact blueprint for their ultimate, inevitable collapse. And honestly, nothing illustrates this better than their signature military formation, the phalanx. It is a brilliant, terrifying metaphor for the Spartan psyche itself. Moving forward, locked shield to shield, spears bristling out, it's an unstoppable wall of iron. It is incredibly strong in one specific forward direction, but it is dangerously inflexible. If the enemy flanks you, if they attack from the sides or the rear, the whole formation completely shatters. It is powerful, but entirely blind to nuance, and that is exactly what happened to their empire. Because you simply can't solve every problem in life by stabbing it with a spear. Sparta actually defeated Athens. They won the Peloponnesian War, but their empire immediately began to crumble. Why? Because they had zero diplomatic skills, none. They completely alienated their natural allies. Their population suffered a severe demographic collapse because they were constantly dying in battle or from natural disasters like a massive earthquake, and they were simply too rigid to adapt to the changes. Finally, in 371 BC, at the Battle of Leuctra, they were crushingly defeated, and not by a massive foreign empire, but by their former allies, the Thebans. They won the military conflict, but they utterly lacked the emotional intelligence and political grace to actually build a lasting peace. They only knew how to dominate, conquer, and instill fear. But an empire, much like a human life, cannot be sustained by fear and force alone. It requires connection, compromise, and wisdom. Section 5, The Psychology of Self-Destruction. This history isn't just a story about ancient Greece. It acts as an incredibly powerful, almost uncomfortable psychological mirror for us today. I want you to look inward for a moment. What actually happens when your entire identity, your worth, your self-esteem, your daily routine is built strictly on the concept of winning? On outworking everyone, on never showing an ounce of weakness, on viewing everyone around you as either a threat or a stepping stone? We see this every day in modern burnout. We see it in the total loss of authentic identity. You build this massive iron fortress to protect yourself, but eventually you wake up and realize you're just trapped inside it. Because when you relentlessly suppress your humanity just to project strength, you lose the ability to actually connect with anyone else. The Spartans built a society that was an unparalleled machine of war, but a machine optimized solely for war cannot survive the quietness of peace. Without an enemy to fight, without a grind to consume them, their entire reason for existing simply vanished. They wanted to be immortalized as the ultimate victors, the unyielding 300. But the deeply disturbing truth is this: if your only language is dominance, if your only tool is conflict, you will eventually consume yourself. You might win the battle, but you will always inevitably lose yourself. So think about that the next time you're pushing yourself to the absolute brink. What are you actually optimizing for? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you in the next one.